Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Vancouver Open Water Swimming Association's third webinar. My name is Patrick Oswald, and I will be the moderator for this session. There is clearly a growing interest in the topic of swimming in cold water, and we have well over 330 people registered for today. We have 3 speakers who will present for 15 minutes each. Many of you have already submitted questions, and these have been shared with the presenters. As members of the audience, your microphones will be muted, but you may ask additional questions on chat, and we will try to answer them if time permits. We are recording the event, and if all goes well, we will post it on our website. But before we get started, Christine Burns, Vice President of the Vancouver Open Water Swimming Association, would like to say a few words. Christine.
Hi, welcome to the Cold Water Swimming webinar. VOWSA's mission is to create safe and enjoyable open water swim experiences for people of all ages and abilities. We have been a volunteer-led nonprofit organization for over 3 decades. Vancouver is a beautiful city by the sea. It's no wonder why open water swimming has been popular here for so long. This year, with the pools being closed, we were excited to hear stories of so many new people discovering the joy of open water swimming. I, like most of you, am very excited and interested to figure out how to stay in the water for as long as possible this fall and winter. Now, this is the really important part of what I have to say. While some of you may have very specific questions regarding medical issues, we cannot provide medical advice and recommend that you check with your doctor before starting any swim program. Now, VOWSA is super grateful for all of its sponsors. Following the presentation, we will hold a draw for 3. We have an Ocean Junction $40 coupon and 2 VOWSA prize packages. To win and receive a prize, you must be present and still logged into the webinar. And now back to you, Patrick.
Okay, thank you, Christine. Our first presenter is Susan Simmons. Born and raised in Montreal, Susan now lives in Victoria with her life partner, Ray. They both very much value the natural environment, good health, and the communities in which they live. For reasons that she will explain, Susan became an avid open water swimmer about 20 years ago, and since then has completed or attempted an impressive number of open water swims in and around Vancouver Island and the chilly fjords of the Queen Charlotte Sound and the Great Bear Sea, which is an area north of the northern end of Vancouver Island. Along the way, Susan has learned a lot about swimming in cold water. But as she will explain, Susan does it for much more than just a pure love of open water swimming. Susan.
So thank you, Patrick, and thank you, VOWSA, for having me come and speak tonight. I really appreciate the opportunity. I just wanted to say hi to everybody from around the world. I'm seeing all these countries pop up, and it's just fabulous to see that out there. So I'm going to start by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from the traditional territories of the Songhees and the Esquimalt First Nations, also known as the Lekwungen speaking people, or for some other people known as Victoria. I am a traditional marathon swimmer and also an adventure swimmer, which means I swim with nothing more than a swimsuit, goggles, and a simple swim cap. And I swim as a way to manage multiple sclerosis. It's a disease I've had for over 25 years, and it's often accompanied by depression. So swimming has helped me with both. Now, my swims are predominantly in water ranging from 9 to 13 degrees Celsius, although I've swum in colder and I've also swum in warmer. If you're interested in learning about the freezing cold water, may I suggest you can contact Nadine Bennett and Catherine Borzak in Ontario. They're the Canadian representatives for the International Ice Swimming Association, and you can find them on Facebook under Canadian Cold Water Swimming. I'm sure they'd be really happy to hear from you. So I always considered myself to be a great big chicken. When I first started swimming in the cold, I started with a wetsuit to prepare for a relay across the Georgia Strait. It was at a place called Island View Beach in Harrow Strait, which is the body between Juan de Fuca and Georgia Straits. And I went in the water and I ran out within 3 seconds. And I thought, there's absolutely no way I will ever do this. This is insane. Who would make me want to do something like this? But over time, I started acclimating to the water. I got more comfortable with it. And eventually I did manage to shed my wetsuit. My ideal water temperature now is between 10 and 12 degrees Celsius. That's where I seem to be happiest and perform best. But I'm happy to push myself in colder water. A few years ago, I attempted a double cross of the Juan de Fuca Strait. It was between 9 and 10 degrees on that particular day. And I was able to manage over 7 hours in the water. So when I'm asked what's cold water or at what temperature do I wear a wetsuit or not wear a wetsuit, my response is very simple. It really depends on you and where you are in your acclimation. Everybody is different. Everybody's at a different place in their acclimation. And you, most importantly, need to feel comfortable with what you're doing. So this has not been an easy journey for me. Like it is work getting in the cold water. And I'm not going to say that it's easy to jump in 10-degree water because it isn't. At least it isn't for me. But what I can tell you is that the benefits for me far outweigh any of those nagging thoughts that say you can't do this or don't do this. And I've had a number of other people say the same. So swimming in the cold water makes it possible for me to exercise with MS. Mine is a heat-sensitive disease. I have attacks when I get too hot. So the water makes it possible for me to exercise, and I've managed to slow the progression of my disease. It's how I've remained out of a wheelchair, and I can continue to work full-time in a high-stress job. I also use exercise in the cold water as a way to manage depression, which often comes hand in hand with MS. And I know the jury's out on this, the science is still coming in. What I can tell you is that when I'm in the water, in the cold water, I feel more alive than anywhere else, especially than in warm water, but even then on land. And a number of the people, it's something that I'm in love with, the feeling, it's almost like an addiction. There's a euphoria there. And some of the people that I swim with have reported the exact same thing. So there are not a lot of people skin swimmers, we're called, on Vancouver Island, those of us who swim without wetsuits. When I first started, it was with a friend, Karen Tanis, and I met her with it through a swim club. So if you're looking for other swimmers, just encourage people in your swim club to give it a try with you, especially now that have a lot of access to the pools. So Karen Tanis, a friend of mine, had a lot of open water experience. She brought me into the open water, and it was together that we learned, had our first experiences in the cold water. A few years ago, I introduced a group of people from Special Olympics, some athletes that I coached, to open water swimming. And they loved it so much, 6 of them decided to form a group called the Spirit Orcas. Last year, they completed a 20-kilometer swim in the Great Bear Rainforest up near Bella Bella. And this year, they did an 80-kilometer swim along the peninsula of Vancouver, Lower Vancouver Island. They went from, so they went all the way around the peninsula, swimming about 10 kilometers, 10 to 15 kilometers each time. None of them wore wetsuits, and the water dipped as low as 9 degrees Celsius. So Spirit Orcas, like the rest of us, were all different shapes and sizes and ages. And we all respond to the water differently. Ali, who you see in the center, she stands about 5 feet tall. She's very lean, very little body fat. She can manage several hours in 11 to 12 degrees Celsius water. She swam for 6 hours in 15-degree water with me near BC Ferries during the Great Big Swim. And Ben, the gentleman with the blue cap in the back, he also is very acclimated to the water. He's about 6'2". He's not carrying a lot of body fat. He's similar to Ali in that he has quite a bit of tolerance. Drew, with the green cap in the back, he's got the most body fat of all of them, and he manages the least amount of time in the water. So he would swim for an hour to an hour and a half, then he would get out, we'd warm him up, and then pop him in again later on down the road. So The big difference between Ali, Drew, and Ben is the amount of time that they spend in the cold, not just the cold water, but the cold. Ali and Ben walk around in their t-shirts and shorts all year round. They rarely ever wear jackets. I've never seen either one of them in a winter jacket. And both of them, Ali drops into the water with me throughout the winter in Juan de Fuca Strait, where it can be sometimes 7 or 8 degrees Celsius. It gets pretty nippy out there. And Ben has been doing that as well. They've both been exposed to the cold all of their lives. Drew, he's new to this. He only started really training in the cold this year, and it showed up on the swim. He wasn't able to last as long, but we saw significant improvement. He started with 20 minutes and he would shiver, and then he moved up to an hour and a half, and if we were lucky, we could get 2 hours out of him. So there's no real magic from what I've seen. What it is it's a discipline. It's about getting yourself in the water and acclimating your body, changing it over time to be more accustomed to the cold. So I swim predominantly in the traditional territories of the Coast Salish and the Hulksik First Nations. So for Coast Salish waters, I'm swimming in the Salish Sea, which is Juan de Fuca, Harrow, and Georgia Strait, and all of these bodies of water are very different, and I'm excited to learn about why. The temperatures in Juan de Fuca, where I swim, are between 7 and 13 degrees throughout the year. 7 in the winter, about maximum 13, maybe 14 if you're lucky in the summer. My home base is Juan de Fuca, although I often swim in Harrow Strait as well. For my adventure swimming, which sometimes are also marathon swims, I'm swimming in Hulksik territory, and that's up in the Great Bear Rainforest, or the Inside Passage. So this is where BC ferries go to get up to Prince George. It's absolutely beautiful up there. The waters that I've been in there have been between 7 and 15 degrees. But they really vary because of the ice caps coming down from the glaciers coming down from the mountains. In the winter, the water freezes over. I'd love to go up there and try it out at that point. And in the summer I've been in, it's been as low as 9 or as high as warm as 15. So when you're swimming in either one of these bodies of water, you can swim with or without a wetsuit. It's really up to you and where you're at, how comfortable you feel about it. But all of the bodies of water that I've swam in, the Georgia Strait is the warmest. And it's just absolutely a fabulous place to swim. I recently did an adventure swim around a good portion of Hornby Island where it was 18 degrees. So it was fantastic. In Vancouver, a lot of you are, I think, listening from there. You have the added value. You have a bonus. You have lifeguards at the beaches. You have VOWSA, such an amazing supportive community of swimmers. If you all connect with one another and support and help one another with your swimming, it's great. Oh, sorry. So whenever I go into the water, I always check everything around me before I even put my foot in to find where my exit point's going to be. I want to make sure that I know exactly where I'm going to get out and how I'm going to get out before I and walking, I don't immerse my head for a while. I've been told that the shock of immersion, like complete, can cause panic. And you can lose your breath, and I think that's where a lot of people drown. So after jumping in water that was 3 degrees, I'd have to agree. It's very shocking. So when you're getting in the water, take your time. It's not a race. Keep your head above water. Wait until you feel comfortable. A lot of times I'll put water on my face and just slowly put my face in. And if the water is far too cold, I remember one year what I did when I first started acclimating was I would just walk back and forth on the beach in the water, up to my waist and then eventually up to my shoulders, getting more and more used to the water. Sometimes it takes me 5-10 minutes to get all the way in. Either way, it's fine. So this here is black water up in the Great Bear Rainforest. And this was, I don't know the science of this, but whenever the water is black, I'm always a little afraid because I know it's going to be super cold. So things that I watch for hypothermia with swimmers, I watch for myself, I monitor myself, and I monitor the swimmers with me, and we all watch each other. So some of what we're watching for in cold water is slurred speech, blue lips, just shallow breathing. Sometimes when you hear people breathing in the water, it's quite loud if it gets shallow. A decreased stroke rate, they're going a little bit slower, or their stroke might change. Drew got very uncoordinated and he slowed down quite a bit when he was getting hypothermic. You might get a claw hand as well, that it looks like what it sounds, a claw. And you could become very confused and make poor decisions. So this is where people run into trouble. They think they're fine, but they're not. And there's a lack of concern about the conditions, or you can't answer simple questions. So try asking people math questions if you're concerned about them. You know, it's 5 + 48, see what happens.
I'm not doing very well, am I?
Drew, when he experienced hypothermia.
It's much colder on this side than the other side. Yeah, that'll be perfect.
So you can see he's shivering quite a bit, but he's okay. He's fine. We're just getting his towel for him.
I was trying to cooperate.
And it's hard for him to understand. He has autism.
I'm just getting your towel. Ben might want to get out too. No, just you.
So this is a really important point. Drew is saying his friend Ben might want to get out too. If you're swimming with other people, base it on yourself, not them. It's not a competition. If you start trying to outdo other people in terms of who's going to be in the water the longest, or how come I got out and they didn't, then you're going to run into trouble. And I know I'm getting close to my time. I'm just about done here. So a few other things that I watch for. This is what happened on my double cross in One to Few, because somebody had asked about this. When my crew is watching me, I have tests all the way along the way. There's questions. They're looking to see how can I open my food container? Can I figure out how to open up a thermos? Things like that. So can I physically coordinate it? Can I mentally figure it out? Am I shivering? This is the one and only time I've ever shivered in the water. I don't like to get to that point, because when you get out, sometimes you have a 1 degree drop in your temperature. If you're shivering when you're in, and then you get out and you have a 1 degree drop, you're really going to be shivering when you get out. So I try not let it get to that point. And the other thing is, when you shiver, eventually with hypothermia, the shivering goes away. So if you can try not get there to begin with. But you'll see here, what happens is the color of my skin changes quite dramatically on this swim. My legs are going to go all white. This is a buildup over 7 hours. It didn't happen all at once. And this is just at that moment in time when that was it. It's kind of So I'm aware of what's going on. And you'll see here my legs are white. We'll get a better shot. They're calling my crew to let them know I'm going to have a bit of tea and then I'm going to swim. And there you can see my legs are getting pretty white. So now I'm starting to feel something else happen in my body. It's a feeling that I've never had before. It was quite painful. And I'm getting upset because I know I have to get out, but it's okay. I'd rather get out than, something else happen. I've apologized to my crew for not making it because they put in a hard day's work. And my shivering is now out of control, so I want out of that water pretty quickly. My crew's going to work with me, and they're going to take me to the boat. I asked them, I said, I'll swim to the boat, just escort me there, I'm fine. And I was, but it took me about 4 hours. I was shivering violently for about 2 hours on the trip home. It really wasn't fun. Sorry. So just a few tips for rewarming and things that you can bring with you. Remove your swimsuit right away. If you're wearing something wet, it's not going to help. Dry off, put on a pair of pants and a hoodie. Wool socks do wonders. They go great with Birkenstocks or Cogs if you wear those. Wear a toque, invest in a parka, and most important tip I think is to eat. You cannot heat a furnace without fuel. Some people just drink liquid. You need to have the calories in you in order to get your metabolism going and in order to be able to fuel your body to warm up. Embrace the discomfort. You're not going to get warm quickly. Sometimes it takes several hours, but eventually you get used to it. And as I said before, like there's a euphoria that comes with it. It's been absolutely worth it for me swimming in the cold water. It's kept me out of a wheelchair. It's kept me healthy, and it's managed to help me manage my depression. And I've had the most amazing adventures ever. So if you want to stay in touch with me, you can reach me through my website at susansimmons.ca. There's a contact button, or feel free to reach out on Facebook. I'm happy to friend people and share swim stories and adventures. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Susan. That you've actually touched on a lot of the questions that people had been submitting before. And that was an incredible story. I can't thank you enough. I have all sorts of questions, but sadly, well, we only have so much time. So thank you very, very much. And I do encourage people who have more questions about what you just talked about to get in touch with you. That was fantastic.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. Our next presenter is Dr. Gordon Giesbrecht. Gordon is a professor of thermophysiology in the Faculty of Kinesiology and Recreation Management at the University of Manitoba. Gordon studies human responses to exercise and work in extreme environments and has been the director of the Laboratory for Exercise and Environmental Medicine since 1991. He has conducted hundreds of cold water immersion studies that have provided life-saving information about the physiology of and pre-hospital care for human hypothermia. He's also conducted over 100 vehicle submersions with people in them to study survival and exit strategies in sinking vehicles. Gordon has helped create many educational programs for drowning prevention and treatment and has written protocols used by emergency response operators around the world. Gordon has consulted for the military, the Coast Guard, and even the FBI. Dubbed Professor Popsicle by Outdoor Magazine in 2003, Gordon has appeared on The Late Show with David Letterman, The Nature of Things with David Suzuki, The Rick Mercer Report, the Discovery Channel, National Geographic Channel, and other networks. And now, here he is with us to talk about drowning prevention and cold water survival. Gordon.
Thanks so much, Patrick. Can you hear me?
Yes.
And now I can add VOWSA to my resume. Very excited to be here. Great to see so many people interested. Thank you, Sylvie, for the invitation, and thanks, Susan, for that inspiring talk. Yeah, so I've been hypothermic 40 times myself, mostly staying still in 8-degree water. That's what we do at our lab. I'm retired from that now. From now on, I practice the Christmas spirit. It's much better to give than to receive. So I watch other people get cold. I'm not a cold water swimmer, although I've clearly had lots of, I've been cold in water a lot. But I have, I've had a sort of a parallel journey. I spent 10 years training to do a solo expedition to the North Pole. And that got stopped by a knee injury skateboarding. As a stupid 43-year-old, I shouldn't have been doing that. But so there's a lot of things that are similar about training, acclimatization, and risks and dangers. So let's move on here. I'm not sure if my yeah. Sorry, I have to use this. Okay, there we go. So one thing is there are a lot of typical misconceptions about cold water. One that anybody listening here probably doesn't have, and that is that you become hypothermic in minutes in cold water. This is something I fight all the time, so you folks know that, and I have a picture, it's not here, but I often ask, what are the fins? And now people in VOWSA know that we don't, because they go swimming in ice water and cold water all the time, and somehow they're surviving it. So cold water immersion can be, it can be invigorating. There's health aspects, as we've just heard from Susan. It could be neutral. It could be just something that you're working through because you want to swim in cold water. It also can be risky, and we're just going to talk about some of this stuff. So as a background to this, I just want to use this model here, the dose response curve to stress or exposure or training. And if you look down here on the x-axis, you've got stress or exposure or training increasing, and the benefits. And I think we all kind of know that if you increase your stress or exposure or training, you're going to get more and more benefit. Just something to be aware of is, though, that there is a threshold that you got to make sure you don't reach, which is a damage threshold. And if you increase your stress or exposure any further after that, of course, you'll have not only diminishing returns, but you'll actually do some damage to yourself. So you can think, if I'm doing muscle exercise, weightlifting, for instance, you know, I increase my load and my training every day, but then I tear a muscle. And now if I keep training, it's going to go, I'm actually damaging myself. And this really relates well to cold water immersion and acclimatization. And we'll get back to this diagram in a few minutes. Important to know, this is a thermal regulation, a very simple picture that shows what happens when we're in a warm environment. We sweat and vasodilate. We're not going to talk much about that. But in a cold environment, Patrick, can you see my cursor moving here?
I can.
Okay, great. Okay, so two major things that we do, although I saw some questions about brown fat or brown fat heat production. We won't talk about that too much. It is there, but vasoconstriction and shivering are really important. So we shiver in response to cold skin and a cold core, and that's important to remember. And we also vasoconstrict. So I'm just going to show you this here. Vasoconstriction, you can just think of like a radiator. When you decrease the flow to the radiator, you decrease heat loss. And that's what we're trying to do when we vasoconstrict. As you can see, the blood flow in the arms and legs, except when you're exercising, which swimmers are doing. But also shivering is it's muscle contraction, relaxation, repeat 1,000 times, and you increase metabolic heat production. And you can actually produce 300 to 500 watts in shivering, and that's like a small hair dryer on low. Right now, each of us sitting here is producing about 100 watts of heat. Think of a 100-watt light bulb. And soon I won't be able to use that because nobody will know what a 100-watt light bulb is. But anyway, so the function of shivering is to prevent hypothermia or slow the onset of hypothermia. But you can remember, that's a lot of heat. And once you get out, it can power core rewarming. And that's it for thermal regulation. That is a whole grad course condensed in one thing. So there are actually 4 phases of cold water. We talked about the fact that I try to convince people most of the time that you're not going to become hypothermic in minutes. And that's because things happen in an order. And the first thing, and Susan talked about this, the cold shock response. When you cool the skin, you have gasping, hyperventilation, tachycardia, and hypertension. And I've got an asterisk here: hypertension or any kind. If you know you have cardiac disease, you might want to look for a different sport, because the
what is tachycardia?
Oh, sorry, tachycardia is an increase in heart rate, and hypertension is a increase in blood pressure. Sorry, I was wondering which terms I should use, and I obviously blew it. Anyway, this usually happens lasts about 30 to 60 seconds. And as Susan noted, Susan has already read the book on this, obviously, or just experienced it. This really becomes an issue if your head goes underwater. So when you're doing this, don't dive off the dock, don't dive off the boat, because my joke for this is, if your head goes underwater and you gasp, then you don't have to worry about the rest of the lecture, because you'll drown right there. So and hyperventilation usually follows after that. And so this is a problem, because if you can't control your breathing, you can't control your swimming motions very well, and then panic starts to set in because you can't swim very well, you can't keep your mouth out of the water, so you hyperventilate a little bit more, then you panic a little bit more, you swim a little worse. It's a vicious cycle, and there are numerous reports of people watching someone jump in, and very soon thereafter they just go into the water. So you cool the skin first. If you're in the water for a little bit longer, now the cooling goes a little bit deeper, cooling the nerves and muscles. And nerves and muscles don't work as well when they're colder. So you have a gradual loss of dexterity, feeling, strength, and endurance. And usually that'll kind of kick in after a couple of minutes, and it will just progressively get worse. And depending on the temperature and individuals, the rate changes. Finally, hypothermia might set in, and that is cooling of the core. And if someone is in, if they're just sitting like with a life jacket on or holding onto a boat and not exercising, it could take 30 minutes or more. Now, as we're going to see in a moment, if you're exercising, even though you're producing more heat, you might actually cool quicker. But we'll talk about that in a moment. And here is something else that people were asking questions about. The fourth phase does not happen all the time, but it's called post-rescue collapse. And this happens when rescue is imminent, either pre, during, or post-rescue, and people either see rescue coming, or somebody grabs them, or they just get finished and they reach the beach after they've been swimming for a while. And they've been all keyed up, and they've been producing epinephrine or adrenaline, and you have mental relaxation, and that decreases adrenaline or epinephrine release. And adrenaline is the thing that allows you to do things you shouldn't normally be doing. And so you have vasodilation, and hypotension happens if you decrease your epinephrine or adrenaline. And hypotension is a decrease in blood pressure. And the symptoms range from just physically collapsing to fainting to cardiac arrest. So that's just to keep you aware of what are the possibilities here. Okay. I just want to show you these pictures. These are infrared pictures. So white is warm, dark is cold, and this is kind of standing out in the room. Kind of diffuse, it's kind of a similar temperature all across. And this is someone who has just come out of being in cold water, just being not swimming around. And you can see that everything is really cold except these areas under the armpits, the neck, and the groin. And this is where there are large vessels close to the skin. But here is what you are when you're swimming. This is someone who was swimming and just got out of the water quickly. They took this picture. And so this is not necessarily surprising, but it makes sense. This person has been swimming with their arms. They got blood flow to the arms. They've been producing heat by those muscles that have been swimming. And that heat, although it might make you feel warmer, that heat is going to the skin. Remember, this is the picture of the skin. So warmer skin means you're losing more heat. So this is not to say don't do this, but just know that when you are swimming in cold water, normally we tell people if you're in a boat, you're a recreator and your boat capsizes, stay with the boat, don't swim because you're going to get cold. That message is not relevant for you folks, but just you should know when you are swimming, this is what's happening. You're losing more heat. All right, so what are some of the concerns about cold water swimming? Well, first of all, cold hands and feet. When you get into the cold water, normal progression goes from you feel cold, then you feel pain, then you feel numb, maybe if the cooling gets worse, and then finally you might feel nothing. One of the problems is Raynaud's syndrome. This picture down in the right-hand corner is Raynaud's syndrome, where there's absolutely no blood flow to those white fingers. This would not be similar. I've not seen anything like Susan's white legs. I definitely, Susan, we have to talk. Those are great pictures. But this is, I don't think that's Raynaud's of the whole leg. But if you have this problem, there are some things you can do to train for that. I could give you the reference for that, but in this case, maybe it's something this might be something that keeps you out of this sport. I just have to find my advancer here. Okay, then hypothermia, as we've talked about, and I think Susan did a great job of talking about the signs and symptoms of, I'm not going to list them here, but she did a really good job. Slurred speech, I'm not going to show a list, but I am going to read her, this is her list. I took a picture of that, is blue lips. Well, slurred speech, that's a main thing there. Decreased stroke rate, poor coordination, poor swimming coordination. That's your cold incapacitation kicking in there. The claw hand, confusion, One good thing, another good test is to just give somebody 3 or 4 numbers, tell them to say those numbers forwards, and then ask them to say it backwards. And you'll learn really quick if they're with it or not. And, you know, they can't answer simple questions. Indeed, that's pretty much it right there. Frostbite, I've heard people talk about this. Frostbite is not an issue during cold water swimming. You cannot get frostbite in water, no matter how cold it is, because if the water's not frozen, your tissues can't freeze. But you can have what's called the non-freezing version of frostbite, which is non-freezing cold injury. This is very important. You can, I've got, when I was talking to the group last week, I said I have 8 numb fingertips. It's actually 10. All 10 of my fingertips are numb. I've got a permanent injury to nerve endings in my fingers, primarily from the training that I did for the North Pole. I never froze my fingers, but yeah, so there you go. Increasing tolerance, performance without damage, right? What you want to do is, as you are training, increase your tolerance, and you want to increase your performance without doing damage. You remember, acclimatation. I'm just going to put these up here so I can get this slide. Remember this slide. As you increase the stress and exposure, you will get a benefit unless you get to that damage threshold. Okay, so acclimatization and adaptation. Again, you've heard Susan talk about, you know, people start shivering after 30 minutes, and then as they do more and more of it, they don't shiver for 2 hours. So that is an adaptation, which is a decrease in a defense response to a continual stimulus or a recurring stimulus. And the other thing, of course, is we have cold-induced vasoconstriction. That's decreased blood flow to the skin, if I didn't explain that earlier. And if you keep going into cold, whether it's air or water, that response will decrease. And that actually is good, because when you decrease blood flow to the skin, your skin gets cold, the tissues get cold, your receptors get cold. So if you can keep blood flow there, you will decrease the potential of having non-freezing cold injury. Yeah, so there you go. Let's move on to the next one. So possible concerns at the end of the swim. We're packing a lot into these 15 minutes here, so I think I've got 2 or 3 slides left. So one is you can be clumsy and sick. People have reported being dizzy, fainting, nausea, falling down, and numbness. Now, numbness can come from 2 reasons. First is the real-time effect of cold on the nerves and the receptors. As I said before, you cool them, they don't work as well. But it's short-term. You warm up again, and your nerves and receptors work fine. However, you can have non-freezing cold injury, which is a lasting effect of damaging nerves, receptors, and blood vessels. And that's non-freezing cold injury. And long-term effects are possible. This can last days to weeks to months to being permanent. I mean, I have a minor permanent non-freezing cold injury of all 10 of my digits, for instance. And shivering, this is what pretty much going to happen to anybody if you weren't shivering during the swim. By the way, if you're swimming, you're producing heat. If you start shivering when you're swimming, you need to think about maybe it's time to stop and come back another day. And then you can build up how long you can swim until you start shivering. Because if you're shivering while you're swimming, it's a sign that you're losing heat. And generally, you should take that as a warning, unless you're really experienced and you know your body well enough. So when you stop shivering, you stop producing heat. So shivering heat production is needed because your body's cold. And you also remove shivering inhibition stimuli. So if someone is shivering and you ask them to do a calculus question, or you ask them to do some exercise or think about something, they'll actually stop shivering. And that's what you're doing when you're swimming. But when you stop, you don't have that shivering inhibition stimuli anymore. And the other thing is, and again, Susan mentioned this, I'm always impressed when practitioners actually know this stuff. There is an after drop when you get out of the water. It's a continued decrease in core temperature. So remember, shivering is stimulated by cold skin and a cold core. So if you get out and your core temperature continues to drop, which it will, you're going to have an increased shivering stimulus. And now you're not exercising, producing heat. So you can be shivering like crazy after a couple of minutes. It's actually fun to watch. You can watch somebody shiver more and more and more. You can say, well, their core temperature is going down. And then you can see their shivering start to go down, decrease a bit. And you can see, well, now their core temperature is coming up. Generally, when you stop shivering, you have warmed up. So what can you do about it? Well, one thing is don't swim alone. Bad enough if you swim alone in warm water, but in cold water, you really do need to have people with you who know what they're doing. And gradually build up your exposure. You know, if you're swimming in the summer, you swim into the fall. If you swim every day or at least every week, now you're going to get gradual in the same place. You'll get a gradual decrease in the temperature. And so that exposure is either the temperature or the time you're in the cold water. And you can titrate or what's the word? Control your buildup to increase your tolerance and exposure while avoiding signs of damage. You know, you get out, you get done, and your fingertips are numb for 5 minutes. Okay, you do it tomorrow and they're numb for 5 minutes. Okay, but if they're numb for 5 minutes today, and next week they're numb for 10 minutes, and then next week they're numb for 15 minutes, then you are doing damage. That's not just the short term; it's getting to long term. So again, that's a decision you have to make. I had one guy tell me that frostbite wasn't a big deal while you're mountain. I told people never accept numbness because that's a sign of frostbite. And I said, well, you know, you're the 86th person to climb Mount Everest, and for you to lose a finger to climb Mount Everest solo without oxygen, that's worth it to you. But for most of us in the room, it's not. Consider wetsuits and head caps. There's lots of questions about what should we buy, what brand, what thickness. Basically, get one, try it, see how it goes. Borrow one. I can't tell you. I'm not sure that the company matters. It's, you know, the thickness is probably the issue, and you can determine from trial and error what's best for you. If you're good, unless you're a skin swimmer.
Gordon, it's my job to let you know that we've got like 30 seconds or so left.
Okay, this is it. This is the end. So at the end of the swim, as quickly as possible and with as little effort as possible, change into warm, dry clothes, avoid walking around, get in a shelter, which is a vehicle or building, drink warm, high energy drink, you heard that, and prepare to have someone transport you home if necessary. And so I want to thank VOWSA for the invitation. Thank all of you for listening. And as I say to everybody when they leave their lab or at the end of any of these talks, good luck, keep safe, and remember, keep cool, but don't freeze. Thanks.
Wow, Gordon, thank you very, very much. So interesting, and the questions were coming in thick and fast, but unfortunately we only have so much time, so perhaps these questions can be forwarded on to you, and there's a way that we might post some of the answers afterwards.
Sure, no problem.
Unlike swimming pools with their clear chlorinated water and controlled temperature, when you open water swim, you are, well, there are tides, there are currents, the temperature can fluctuate, and you are not alone. You are sharing the water with a multitude of plants and animals. To talk about this is our next presenter, Dr. Brian Hunt. A biological oceanographer, Brian is a professor of oceanography at the University of British Columbia's Institute for the Oceans and Fisheries, and currently holds the Hakai Professorship in Oceanography. Brian grew up next to and often in the ocean around Durban, South Africa. Fascinated with fish, Brian originally planned to become an ichthyologist or fish expert, but a trip to the Antarctic opened his eyes to the world of ocean science. Obtaining his PhD in Tasmania, Brian has done widespread research around the world, including in the Arctic, the Antarctic, the North and South Pacific, and the Mediterranean. But since arriving at UBC in 2006, Brian's research is focused on BC's coastal ecosystems, including in particular those of BC's central coast and the Strait of Georgia. In other words, the ecosystems of the very waters in which many of us are swimming today. Brian.
Thank you very much, Patrick, and thanks everyone for the fantastic talks. It's been really interesting for me. I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, so yes, I'm going to be talking a little bit about oceanography and swimming conditions in the Salish Sea. I would say, I mean, I'm definitely focusing this on the Salish Sea, but I think that these are, what I'll be telling you about are general principles that are applicable in many places around the world. This image here is like looking down on the coast of British Columbia from space, and you can see the Strait of Georgia or the Salish Sea right over there, and the central coast where Susan was talking about swimming right over here. So this is looking north. Okay, so what are the things that we care about from a swimming perspective? So I am a swimmer. I do open water swimming too, and everything I've swum from 31 degrees to minus 1.8 in the Antarctic, and stay in there very long at all. But yeah, temperature is really important, obviously, and that's really what I'm going to focus on. But the processes that affect temperature in our coastal waters or in the ocean in general. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the organisms that we might encounter in this particular location, and then I'm not going to talk about pollution, but I'm going to give you some resources so that you can check this out for yourself and keep a tab on pollution issues. Okay, so the key factors for temperature. We're going to start off with the bathymetry. So this is like the bottom structure of the ocean. And this is a map of the Strait of Georgia. We have Vancouver just over here. And this is, you can see my arrow, right? My pointer? Yep. Okay, so this is the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and that's is the passageway between the North Pacific Ocean and the Strait of Georgia. We've got a bunch of islands over here. And the blue color is telling you the water depth. And you can see that it's pretty deep in this big basin over here, very deep in the fjords. And then there's lots of shallow areas, and you can see that the Strait of Juan de Fuca is generally fairly deep in the sort of western side, and then it's shallower towards the islands. So this is really important because there's water that moves from the Pacific into the Strait of Georgia. And because you have a lot of water pumping through a narrow channel that's relatively shallow, you get a lot of movement up and down in the water column. So, so turbulence, basically. So you'll see that when you're in the Strait of Juan de Fuca or around the Gulf Islands, there's a lot of turbulence. And what that does is that brings water that's deep in the ocean up to the surface. And I have a picture here that shows you the currents. These are the surface currents in the Strait of Georgia, and you can see, well, I'll just tell you that where it's red, the currents are stronger, and where it's blue, the currents are weaker. So you can see that Juan de Fuca Straits and these islands, in the narrow channels and the shallow areas, there's strong currents. So this is really reflecting this movement of water through the strait. And so again, like where you get strong currents, you tend to get deeper water coming to the surface, and deeper water is always colder. And so you would expect to find colder conditions in those places than you would generally than you would in places where you have lower currents. Okay, so that's those are the currents, and that's why bathymetry is important and the tidal action that's related to bathymetry. Another factor is freshwater. We live in the Pacific Northwest. It's a rainforest. We get a lot of fresh water. The main freshwater inputs are either directly from the rivers or from the rain on the ocean. And those of us who live in Vancouver or in the Strait of Georgia would be familiar with this, the phrase river plume. So this is something that happens in the spring and summertime. This is actually not rain driven. This is from melting snowpack. And you get this really dirty fresh water that comes pumping out in the summertime. That's when you get the heat flow of the Fraser. And so that fresh water has particular properties. And in the summer, it can actually be quite warm. Fresh water coming out into the ocean in the wintertime, on the other hand, can be quite cold. And so we get a lot of this fresh water happening through winter rain or through small creeks and rivers around Vancouver. And so this is cold, fresh water, winter rain, and it can mean that the near shore areas can be quite a lot cooler than further offshore. So one of the important effects of fresh water, why it is so important in the ocean, is that it's less dense than salt water, and that means that it floats. That's because of the lower salt content or no salt content. And you get a similar effect with warm versus cold water. Warm water is less dense, so it's lighter than cold water. And so warm water tends to sit on top of cold water, and fresh water tends to sit on top of salty water. And you can combine those two things as well. So warm, fresh water would be pretty buoyant. And this image that you're looking at here is a simple experiment that's colored water. The red water is warm and the blue water is cold. And I can show you, I'll run this quickly. There's no sound required, just so you can see exactly what happens. Let me take you to, okay. So this person is pouring blue dye into the cold water, testing the water there, putting some red dye in the warm water. Now he's going to take away the barrier, and you're going to see what happens. So you can see that that's cold blue water, heavier than the red water, so it tends to sit underneath. Now, we have a term for that. In oceanography, we call that stratification. So stratification is really important. Every single one of you, I think, have experienced that. That's like when you go in a lake or an ocean in the summertime and you know that you can feel that it's warm on the surface, and when you put your dangle your legs down too far, it's cold underneath. So that's stratification, and that happens when you have different density layers. So it could be in this, like in our location around Vancouver, we could have fresh water out there. The surface would be a little bit fresher, and so you get stratification happening. What that means is that the sun can heat that stratified surface layer. It doesn't have to heat the whole mass of water. It just has to heat the surface, and so it tends to get hotter. And so that's why we tend to get these warm conditions in the summertime. And that's if you get really windy conditions, then you can mix all that up, and then it'll get cool again. And then if you have those places that I was showing you in one, if you go straight where you have lots of currents, you get a lot of mixing. You don't get the stratification happening. So those places tend to always be cool. Whereas in these sheltered waters, you tend to get stratification in the summertime. Okay, so there's obviously seasonality to water temperature. And so, we expect it to be warmer in the summer and cooler in the winter. And I'll show you some pictures of that now. And so, yeah, what I want to do is just show you two aspects of ocean conditions. Well, I'm going to show you some measurements of ocean temperature in the Strait of Georgia. So this is a device there that we use to measure water temperature. And so this is a plot this is something that we look at all the time is oceanography. So I'm going to walk you through it here. So basically what we have is this is a transect. So a boat is basically traveled from this point on the left through that Oceanography Strait, through the islands, and then all the way up to the northern Strait of Georgia. And as it's traveled along, they've been dropping a device to the bottom, and they've been measuring temperature. And so what you're seeing here is the depth in the y-axis. So you can see that it's quite deep, down to maybe 200 meters in Oceanography Strait. And then if you go through the Gulf Islands, it gets shallow, and then it gets really deep again, down to maybe 400 meters in the main basin. The colors here are showing the temperature. So the cooler colors, purple and blue, that's cold. Green is in between, and red is the warmest. This is conditions in the summertime through the Strait of Georgia. And that cold water, that's the Pacific. That's the cold, salty Pacific water. Because it's cold and salty, it's dense. And so it comes in underneath and it sort of seeps up through the Oceanography Straits and into the Gulf Islands. And with that mixing that happens here, it cools the water in the Strait of Georgia. And you can see here that on the surface, it's cooler than further out into the Pacific and then into the Strait of Georgia. And then that cool water comes into the Strait of Georgia. And then in the summertime, we have stratification. So you can see here, there's this nice, shallow, warm layer. So that's stratification that's happening. Well, it's not that warm, right? It's around 11, 12 degrees, but relatively speaking. And so that happens in the summertime. And that's out in the middle of the Strait of Georgia. So it's a little bit different to what we would experience in the inshore waters, where it can actually get quite a lot warmer. Okay, so seasonality. Okay, so this is the water temperature in Vancouver. The seasonal cycle. We have the red is the maximum temperature. So this is a long-term average, and then the red is the maximum temperature, and the blue is the minimum temperature. And so what you can see is that it reaches the lowest points in around February, March, and then it increases through to maximum in around August or September. So that's, if you live here, that's what you'd experience. And then it gets cool quite quickly as you get into winter. And this is as you get into fall. And this is in the surface. So as what happens in the fall, you get windy. And when the wind comes, you break up that nice stratified layer, and then things cool down really quite quickly. Okay, so that's our typical seasonal cycle. It lags a bit the air temperature because it takes longer to warm up water than it does to warm up air. And one of the things that you'll notice is that there are big differences around the Strait of Georgia in terms of the temperature that you'd experience. So this was the plot on the right was the Vancouver cycle. You can see there's a maximum of 13 degrees. You go just across the way to Burrow Inlet, you can get a maximum of 18 degrees. That's because you have more fresh water, and depending on where you are, and you can have more stable water, maybe less wind effects and more stratification, so it's able to get a little bit warmer. Now the epitome of that is Desolation Sound. So this is the warmest water in the Strait of Georgia. It's up in the north. There's lots of islands, very protected. You get up to 22 degrees Celsius, so it's pretty balmy. And then if you go to those tidal passages, Gulf Islands, Strait of Juan de Fuca, there the water temperature is generally pretty low. It's generally less than 10. It can be as low as 7 degrees Celsius. It can be even colder than that. Now, Susan mentioned this, that you can get freezing in inlets. And this freezing, I've seen this happening up on the Central Coast. This is a picture from Princess Louisa Inlet. Freezing happens in the wintertime, obviously. It's really cold, particularly at the top of the inlets where you get what we call outflow winds that are blowing off the ice sheets, of the ice that are up at the top of the mountains, the coast mountains. It really cools down the water, and it's also there's a lot of fresh water. I mean, it's snowing, but there's rain as well in the winter, so there's fresh water on the surface, and that freezes easier than the salty water. So you'll see this from time to time. I mean, occasionally you'll see freezing on the surface right near shore around Vancouver in a really cold winter, and that's happening usually when there's this is the fresh water that's right near the shore. That's just right on the surface. Okay, so those are the parameters, the main parameters of temperature, and you can apply those general rules to most places around the world. So the importance of circulation, connectivity with the ocean, and then obviously the seasonal cycles. So one of the things that we'll encounter in Vancouver, and when you're swimming, you'll see, we particularly see harbor seals. You may see sea lions from time to time. So there is some seasonality to these guys. They fish. They like, well, mostly fish, and they like herring and salmon. So like good times. Really, probably the peak time is during the herring spawn. And herring season, this is up in the sort of central spawning stock of herring in British Columbia. Big fishery, and there are lots of animals that come in and eat these herring. And this happens the spawning happens in February, but the fish are starting to build up sort of in December, January. So like from December, January on through to about March is when you might expect to see expect to see sea lions and seals in areas where you get herring. So you might see them up in Hausan. We have some herring spawning now in False Creek as well. So you'll probably see a little bit more activity at that time as well in the early spring. All right, something else that you might encounter, I think all of us encounter these, is jellyfish. Jellyfish are you find them absolutely everywhere. That it's totally normal, totally natural, but we do tend to get more around areas of human habitation. They really like they use docks. So this is a very common species that you're looking at right here. It's a marine jellyfish. It's almost guaranteed that you've seen this. And they have a little polyp stage. So this is the polyp over here. Polyps like to live on the undersurface of structure. And so they really love docks. Those are just great places for a polyp to live. And they produce lots and lots of tiny little baby medusae, and that generates these big aggregations of jellyfish. So in most areas, like around docks, all up and down the Strait of Georgia and the coast of BC and other parts of the world, you will tend to find a lot of more jellyfish in those areas. They do well. They generally, you'll notice them more later in the season, so they're not very active in the wintertime, and then the numbers will build up usually late summer. That's really the peak time, and that's when you might see these like huge aggregations like you're looking at here in this picture. They can be really near surface as well, so you might be encountering that as you're swimming through the water. All right, so there's plankton as well. Obviously, plankton is plankton is everywhere. And in the Strait of Georgia, everywhere, summertime is the peak time for plankton. The plankton is fueled firstly by the sunshine, and we tend to get big blooms of various types of plankton. One of them is this the coccolithophores that you can see in this left-hand image. This sort of lighter coloration here off West Coast Vancouver Island, that's a big bloom. They usually just happen off the West Coast Vancouver Island. You don't see them in the Strait of Georgia, except in 2015 when we had that, what people call the blob, so the marine heat wave. And we actually might have noticed this milky water in the southern part of the Strait of Georgia in 2015. I remember seeing it. Something else you'll see also in the summertime is these sort of what people refer to as red tides. Some of these red tides can be toxic, but generally they're not. And this, what you're looking at here, certainly isn't. This is called Noctiluca scintillans. It's a kind of dinoflagellate. And you'll notice at night it's very bioluminescent. So if you were swimming in that, it would be pretty cool. I've definitely swum and dived in this in these blooms, and it's quite amazing. When they die and they sink to the bottom, there can be a problem then. That's when they decompose and you can get low oxygen in the deep water. It doesn't affect us, but it does affect the animals that are living down there. Now, it's not to say that all red tides are good or okay. Some are not, but there are some resources around in Vancouver, and I would expect in many places locally, you would have some advisories on harmful algal blooms. That's what we would call the harmful phytoplankton. And so I put together a small list of resources here, which I'll pass on, and that can be shared with the group if interested. You're probably aware of a lot of these. There's a nice resource for Vancouver sea temperature. There's water quality reports, which are useful. That's not just talking about harmful algal blooms, but also pollution, like E. coli levels around Vancouver. So that's useful to have access to. Whoops. And there's a nice resource of Salish Sea surface currents. I'll pass on this link. You can check it out. And then, yeah, some more information on jellyfish and this app, the water depth app, Navionics. Something that you're probably aware of that. It's pretty helpful if you're planning to go swim in a location. You can check out the definition in great detail for free, and help you with planning what you do. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Wow. Well, thank you very, very much. In fact, thank you, Gordon and Ryan. This is perfect. Our timing is perfect. Now, VOWSA's Vice President Christine Burns would like to wrap things up with a few closing comments and to do the draws for some prizes. A reminder, to win a prize, you must stay logged in, so don't go away. Christine? We can't hear you, Christine.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So wow. First of all, thank you, Susan, Gordon, Brian. All that information was amazing. I think everyone is so excited about everything that you guys have shared with us. So thank you so much for doing this. And Patrick, thank you for hosting and moderating and keeping us all organized. Huge thanks to Jesse and Sylvie. They put this together, they found the speakers, they organized everything. Without them, we wouldn't be here. So thank you, Jesse and Sylvie. Also a big thank you to our sponsors. Ocean Junction provided a $40 coupon for today's session, as well as all of our other VOWSA sponsors. And so everyone's patiently waiting for the results of this draw.